Hello, Potomac Crossing Ward. It's Come Follow Me, lesson for Mosiah 1 through 3. Now, as we read through this text, we have to remember that Mormon is the editor, and he makes editorial comments through the text, and a lot of times he explains why he's including stuff. Like, in the words of Mormon, right before he starts Mosiah, he talks about King Benjamin and says a lot of favorable things about him. Clearly, he likes the guy and he's impressed with the text that he's about to include. So whenever you're reading this, you should think, why did Mormon include this? What is his intention? Sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not. So just be cognizant that as Mormon is editing this text, he's bringing stuff in. Think about why he's doing that, and then pay attention for his editorial comments. Okay, so these are general comments on Mosiah 1 through 5, as opposed to just 1 through 3. Chapter 1 is the setup where Mormon includes quotes, and he explains that Benjamin talks to Mosiah, and he says his son Mosiah, he says, look, we're going to have you take over as king, so I want you to have everybody come down. Then chapter 2 is King Benjamin's comments in the lecture to the people. He's basically saying, look, my time is done. I feel like I've done a pretty good job. I'm washing your blood off my hands, and you guys, you really need to do well and keep out of trouble. And then chapter 3 is King Benjamin quoting what the angel had told him the previous night what to say. So that's the layout of the chapters. So general comments, I've got two chunks of comments here. The first is sort of the general context of what's going on and why things were laid out that way and why the people reacted. And then the second thing I want to talk about is the Semitic nature of King Benjamin's comments. There's a ton of Semitic stuff going on that's just lost to us as Gentile Christians, and I want to point some of that stuff out. I'm not going to point everything out. I have a bunch of notes here. I'm going to go through my notes, and then the rest of the notes I'm going to post onto a website. It's ldsgospeldoctrine.net. There's a ton of stuff on there as you guys are stuck in your houses, not going to church. There's a lot of stuff on the internet available to us, other people making YouTube videos and web pages and all that stuff. So I have that linked off of the header for our Ward's Come Follow Me thing. So you can just click on that link and it'll run you to the website. And I'll post my comments, the more detailed stuff on there. And there's also a ton of links to other people's stuff as well. And just go through it and see what you like. Some of it you may like and some of it you may not. But in any case, so the effects on the contents of chapter 3 on the audience is stunning. The force of what Benjamin says is overwhelming to them, but to us the speech is not so overwhelming. Why? The people are overwhelmed by a heavy dose of messianism, and we see this in chapter 3, verses 2 through 22, followed up by a strongly worded warning of eternal damnation, and that's in chapter 3, 23 through 27. We have to assume the general audience needed both, as King Benjamin later says that this is the reaction he wanted. He wanted the people to be overwhelmed by what he was saying. He wanted them to repent. He wanted a huge change of heart in the people, and he's pleased that that result has been accomplished. So when we look through the details of the text, we can try and figure out what's going on with the people. The Nephites come into contact with the Mulekites in the land of Zarahemla. The Mulekites have no written record of the law of Moses, and they've slid into general apostasy and secularism. We see this in Omni chapter 1, verses 14 through 17. Now the Mulekites substantially outnumber the Nephites, and we are informed of this in Mosiah 25:2. So the Nephite remnant, this small group of Nephites, the righteous group that has gone and traveled away from the larger population, they are a minority immigrant population. So there's way more Mulekites than there are Nephites. Now the Nephites are familiar with Messianic doctrine, and these concepts because they've been constantly taught it by Lehi and Nephi and Jacob and Jerem and Enos and all this. The Mulekites have had none of this. So the Mulekites miss all of that. And then after the two groups come into contact, there are false Christs and false prophets among them, so that's a problem. We see that in Omni 1, 15 through 16. And the events here occur less than one natural lifetime. About 30 to 60 years has passed since the Nephite remnant and the Mulekites have joined. So some of the generation of the Mulekites who were apostate and secularized are probably still around. So you have a lot of these older folks who are influencing what's happening. And then Benjamin's speech, particularly the words delivered to him by an angel that he gives in chapter 3, focus very squarely on messianism. The stiff-neckedness of those who observe the law without accepting its messianic implications, and the condemnation of those stiff-necked. So from these general things, we can draw some conclusions about what's happening with the people that Benjamin's addressing. It's clear at the beginning that when the Nephites first arrived in Zarahemla, they would have formed a core of faithful worshipers, but were among a larger population that was largely secularized. The Mulekites were apparently very interested in the law of Moses, which is suggested in Omni 1:14, and apparently embraced it again upon obtaining the record of the law, but were either apathetic or ambivalent or opposed to the messianic implications of the law. Perhaps even the Nephites were being persuaded into apathy by the Mulekite majority. Thus, Benjamin receives his mission from the angel to set them on the course of messianism again, and he does so with powerful consequences. Note the people's confession in Mosiah 4:2, which is King Benjamin's desired effect. As it is, then prior to this, they were not believing those things. So we have to assume that previous to that, they were just not following that. Perhaps the mitigating factors were the Mulekites' Jewish roots, so they were more inclined to observe the Jewish record as opposed to the Nephite preaching. Another might have been the false Christs and false prophets. If you have people in your population that are setting themselves as false Christs, that could tend to turn you off and repel you from that sort of thing. The people just kind of sour on it. So the audience's reaction to the theme of the message and the few historical facts all suggest that the people were drifting away from messianism, or perhaps they were just largely secular. So this might account for why King Benjamin formally announced the change in monarchy in order to get everybody to come up to the temple. So if you have a religious group of people, getting them to come in for one of the feasts, the regalim, which is probably Sukkot or Tabernacles, that would be easy to get them to come. They were probably coming anyway. But if you have a secularized population, they would not be inclined to go through the hassle of going to the temple and packing up for a week and preparing. But if King Benjamin says, hey, we're having a rollover in kingship, so this is something that would bring even the secularized people into the temple. So maybe King Benjamin here is being clever and shrewd in getting as many people up to the temple as possible so that they can hear the new name of their new king, their new political ruler, but then he also wants to reintroduce them to their new spiritual ruler, the Messiah as well. Okay, so that kind of wraps up the context of what's happening here. So now I want to take a look at the Semitic nature of King Benjamin's farewell speech. So Mosiah chapters 1 through 5 contain a lot of rhetoric and imagery that is eminently Semitic, and that's largely lost to us as Christian Gentiles because we're just not steeped in that kind of culture and we're not used to that kind of stuff. So I want to review some of this stuff so that we're cognizant of it as we read through the text. The overall context is that of one of the 3 pilgrimage feasts of ingathering prescribed by the law of Moses. So early on, when Moses has the people and takes them out of Egypt, the Lord institutes 3 big feasts. There's Passover, Weeks, and Tabernacles. So those are the big 3. And those are in Exodus 23, Exodus 34, and then again Deuteronomy 16. These are called the Regalim. The one that is most likely occurring here is the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, which is instituted in Leviticus 23. So as we go through the text, here's some of the things that suggest this is the case. So in Mosiah chapter 1, verse 10, verse 18, and then in chapter 2, verse 1, it says, the people gathered themselves together throughout all the land that they might go up to the temple. I mean, that right there is a big cue for this being one of those temple ingatherings. Benjamin times the farewell speech to bring everybody together. He's got everybody's attention. They're all gathered in. They're all paying attention. So he drags everybody in, and then even the secularized people would have gathered to hear about this new change in monarchy. And then chapter 2, verse 3, it references the firstlings of their flocks. All of the Regalim required temple sacrifice. So if we take a look at Numbers chapter 29, that documents all of the sacrifices that are to be performed. Whenever the people go up to the temple, you're taking animals and you're taking offerings to perform sacrifice. And then Mosiah chapter 2, verse 4, the people are coming in to keep the commandments of God, that thereby they might rejoice. So that's one of the big themes of the Regalim, or these feasts of ingathering, is that they're doing it to keep the commandments, and they're doing it to rejoice and to celebrate. So we see this in Leviticus chapter 23, verses 40 through 43, and I'll go ahead and read those. So here we have, and ye shall take you on the first day the boughs of goodly trees, branches of palm trees, and the boughs of thick trees and willows of the brook. And ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. So notice it's rejoice. They're there to rejoice, just as King Benjamin talks about rejoicing. Verse 41, and ye shall keep it as a feast unto the Lord 7 days in the year, and it shall be a statute forever in your generations. Ye shall celebrate it in the 7th month. Ye shall dwell in booths, or tents, or tabernacles. 7 days all that are Israelites born shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Okay, so that's the end of the quote of Leviticus 23. So Sukkot is the autumn harvest feast where the people give thanks to the Lord for a bounteous harvest. This is the origin, or what the American tradition of Thanksgiving is based on. And it's patterned after. The Regalim are all 8 days long, which explains why King Benjamin had time to build a tower and then have the text written down and distributed among the people through the large crowd, and then ask them questions and then get a response back. They're there for a full week, so they have plenty of time to do all of this stuff. This was not a single day event. And then rejoicing is a prominent theme in King Benjamin's speech. We see this in 2 verse 4, chapter 2 verse 20, chapter 3 verse 4, chapter 3 verse 13, chapter 4 verse 12, and again in chapter 5 verse 4. And King Benjamin explicitly draws a parallel between the ancient exodus from Egypt and the Lehite and Mulekite exodus from Jerusalem in chapter 2 verse 4. He's pointing out to them that just as the ancient Israelites were taken out of Egypt and spared, so were these two populations of people taken out of Jerusalem and spared. So he's drawing that parallel clearly. And then in Mosiah chapter 2, verse 20, that verse is a prayer, an ancient prayer that is used. It's called the Shehechianu, and it's the whole verse there is him reciting this prayer that is integrally connected to all of the Regalim. So King Benjamin is using the prayer, he's connecting it. All of the religious people in the audience would immediately recognize what he's referring to, and he's drawing that connection in with the festival or the feast that they're observing. And then the last one I want to draw attention to, I'm skipping a bunch here because otherwise this would go on really long. The last one I want to refer to here is in chapter 5, verse 10 and 12. King Benjamin refers to them being on the left hand. Okay, if they don't do the right thing, they're going to be found on the left hand. Now this is sort of a word play, but I think there's more to it than simply a pun. So the name Benjamin means the son of the right hand. So he is King Benjamin. They know that means son of the right hand. So he's on the right hand of God. And then chapter 2, King Benjamin at the end of his term of service as king is basically saying, like, look guys, I've done everything I can to do things the right way. So he's saying, I am on the right hand of the Lord because I've not done these bad things, I've served you, I've done all these good things, I've kept you guys out of trouble. And what he's saying is, if you don't follow my example, you don't follow my teachings, you are not going to be a son of the right hand like I am. You're going to be on the left hand of the Lord, which is not where you want to be. So, yes, it's sort of a pun, but more pointedly, he's saying that my job with you is done, my stewardship to you is done, and I've done a pretty good job. At least he thinks he's done a pretty good job, and I mean, clearly the Lord does too. So he's saying that you need to follow my example in doing this so that you won't be on the left hand of the Lord, you'll be on the right hand. And that wraps up my comments. Again, I will put the full set of the text onto the webpage that is linked at the header of this the YouTube channel there, and we'll talk to you next week.